My name is Adrian Cross. I'm 31 years old, and I repair industrial refrigeration systems for warehouses and food processing plants. My days begin before sunrise and usually end long after dark. By the time I get home, my hands smell faintly of machine oil, and every muscle in my back reminds me how many ladders I've climbed. I rented a modest brick house on Ashford Lane because it was quiet. No loud traffic, no crowded apartment walls. Just a row of small homes, separated by narrow gardens and old maple trees that dropped leaves into everyone's yard every autumn. The woman next door moved in almost 2 years after I did. Her name was Claire Bennett. She wasn't the type of person who demanded attention. The first time we met, she apologized because her moving truck had blocked my driveway for 10 minutes. She offered me homemade lemon muffins, as if that somehow balanced the inconvenience. I accepted one. It was terrible. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the tray. I bake under stress, she admitted. I can tell. From that moment, conversation came naturally. Not every day. Not even every week. Just enough that our lives quietly overlapped. If a storm rolled through while one of us was at work, whoever got home first rescued the other's packages from the porch. When my lawn mower refused to start one Saturday morning, Claire appeared carrying jumper cables like she was answering an emergency call. When her kitchen sink began leaking, I fixed it before the water ruined her cabinets. We developed a rhythm neither of us questioned. She learned I couldn't survive a morning without strong coffee. I learned she never remembered to buy batteries until every remote in her house stopped working at once. Her golden retriever, Jasper, became convinced my backyard existed solely for tennis balls. Sometimes after dinner, we'd stand on opposite sides of the fence talking about nothing important. Her coworkers, my impossible clients, weather forecasts that were almost always wrong. Neither of us crossed the invisible line between friendship and something deeper. There never seemed to be a reason to. Then winter arrived. Everything changed so gradually that I almost missed it. Claire stopped lingering outside after work. The lights in her upstairs office stayed on until midnight. The cheerful music she usually played while cooking disappeared. Even Jasper stopped barking whenever I came home. He mostly lay beside the front window, watching the driveway, as though waiting for someone who never arrived. One Friday evening, I noticed Claire struggling to carry several storage boxes from her car. I walked over before she could protest. "They're heavier than they look," she said. "They always are." Inside, her living room looked strangely unfinished. Photo frames leaned face down against the wall. Half-filled cardboard boxes surrounded the sofa. A stack of unopened mail covered the dining table. It didn't look like someone moving in. It looked like someone packing memories away. "Renovating?" I asked. She hesitated. "Something like that." Her smile appeared only for a second before fading again. I didn't push. Everyone deserves at least one locked door inside their life. The next morning I found a paper bag hanging from my front doorknob. Inside was a fresh loaf of bread still warm from the oven. A handwritten note rested on top. "Thanks for yesterday. I finally got those boxes sorted." No signature. She didn't need one. For the next several weeks, our conversations became shorter. Not awkward, just thinner. Like she was speaking through exhaustion. More than once I noticed her staring into space before realizing I had asked a question. She apologized constantly for forgetting things, for canceling coffee, for answering messages late. None of those things sounded like Claire. One cold Tuesday, snow began falling before sunset. Around 10 that night, I stepped outside to take the trash bin to the curb. That's when I noticed something unusual. Claire's back door was open. Not wide. Just enough for warm yellow light to spill across the snow. Jasper stood quietly on the porch. He wasn't barking. He wasn't moving. He simply stared toward the garden path. Following his gaze, I saw Claire. She was walking barefoot through the snow, slowly, deliberately. Her arms hung loosely at her sides. Her eyes were open. But there was nothing behind them. No focus. No recognition. No awareness. For one impossible second, I wondered whether she was looking directly at me. Then she walked straight past the old birdbath without reacting, as though she couldn't feel the freezing ground beneath her feet. My heartbeat quickened. Claire. She didn't answer. I took a cautious step forward. Claire. Still nothing. Only the faint crunch of snow beneath her feet. She stopped beneath the maple tree separating our yards. Her lips moved. At first I couldn't understand the words. Then one sentence became clear. I couldn't get there in time. The sentence broke apart into another whisper carried away by the wind. I'm sorry. Jasper let out the softest whine I'd ever heard. I approached carefully. Close enough to help. Far enough not to frighten her if she suddenly woke. Claire, I said gently. You're outside. She slowly turned toward my voice. For a brief moment, I thought she finally recognized me. Instead, she reached out blindly until her fingertips caught the sleeve of my jacket. She gripped it with surprising strength. Her voice trembled. Please. A long pause. Don't let me lose anyone else. The words settled into the cold night with a weight I couldn't explain. I had no idea what dream she was trapped inside. I only knew it wasn't letting go. I didn't try to wake her. Something about the distant look in her eyes told me that startling her would only make things worse. It's okay, I said quietly. You're safe. The words seemed to reach somewhere inside the dream she was wandering through. Her grip loosened just enough for me to guide her toward the porch. She followed without resistance. Jasper walked beside us, brushing against her leg every few steps, as though he had done this before. Inside the house, the warmth hit us immediately. A mug of tea sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The television glowed silently in the living room. A book lay open on the arm of the couch, abandoned halfway through a chapter. Everything suggested she'd been awake only minutes earlier. Yet now she moved through the house like someone following invisible footprints. She climbed the stairs one slow step at a time. I stayed a respectful distance behind. When we reached her bedroom, she stopped beside the bed without seeming to know what to do next. I gently pulled back the blankets. Go ahead, I whispered. She sat down obediently. Only then did she seem to notice the cold. Her shoulders shivered violently. I picked the thick quilt from the foot of the bed and wrapped it around her. For several seconds she remained perfectly still. Then, without opening her eyes any wider, she reached for my hand. Her fingers were freezing. They're waiting for me, she murmured. Who's waiting? No answer. Only slow, uneven breathing. Another sentence escaped her lips. I was supposed to be there. The words carried so much regret that they settled heavily in my chest. After a few minutes, her breathing finally became steady. She released my hand. I quietly switched off the bedside lamp, leaving only the hallway light glowing beneath the door. Before leaving, I glanced once more toward the bed. She looked peaceful now, as though none of it had happened. The next morning, I barely managed 3 hours of sleep before work. My thoughts kept returning to the woman next door, walking barefoot through fresh snow. Around 8:30, while loading tools into my truck, I heard Jasper barking happily. Claire stepped onto her porch, carrying a travel mug. The moment she saw me, she hesitated. You look exhausted, she said. I could say the same. She gave a weak smile. I probably stayed up too late again. I studied her for a second. Claire, do you remember going outside last night? Her expression changed instantly. Outside? What do you mean? You were sleepwalking. The color drained from her face. No, you were in the backyard. She stared at the porch boards beneath her feet. For several seconds she said nothing. Finally she whispered. It happened again. That single word answered questions I hadn't even asked. You've done this before. She nodded slowly. A few. Her laugh carried no humor. More than I'd like to admit. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, even though steam no longer rose from it. I thought it had stopped. You never mentioned it. I was hoping I never would have to. The silence between us stretched gently rather than awkwardly. Finally I asked, have you talked to a doctor? I started. I never finished. She looked embarrassed by the confession. There were always other things that felt more important. Work, bills, responsibilities. The familiar excuses people use when they're barely holding themselves together. I don't remember what I said. Did I? she asked carefully. I hesitated. You apologized. She closed her eyes. I always apologize. You also said you didn't want to lose anyone else. When she looked back at me, her eyes had filled with quiet panic. So I talked again. Just a little. She inhaled shakily. I hate that. I don't. Her eyebrows lifted. You don't. It tells me you're carrying something alone. For a long moment she simply looked at me. Not as a neighbor. Not even as a friend. More like someone deciding whether another human being could be trusted. Finally she nodded once. I'll make an appointment. Good. She gave a tiny smile. But, if it happens again... Her voice almost disappeared. Would you check on Jasper first? I couldn't help smiling. You really think about your dog before yourself? He gets scared. So do you? She didn't argue. Instead, she looked away toward the snow-covered gardens. I suppose I do. That afternoon, I stopped by the hardware store after work. Before heading home, I bought a small wireless door chime designed for elderly patients who wandered at night. Nothing complicated. Just a sensor that would quietly alert if the back door opened. When I knocked on Claire's door that evening, she looked surprised to see the small box under my arm. I thought this might help, I said. She examined the package before looking back at me. You didn't have to buy this. I know. For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile reached her eyes. Then, thank you. Neither of us realized it then. But that simple door chime would become the sound that quietly changed both of our lives. The door chime became part of my nightly routine, almost without me realizing it. Some people fall asleep listening for traffic. Others notice the hum of an air conditioner. I found myself listening for that soft electronic tone from the house next door. For nearly 2 weeks, it never sounded. Life seemed to settle into something almost normal again. Claire went back to leaving for work around 8 each morning. We exchanged short conversations over the fence, and every few days she'd bring Jasper over to chase tennis balls across my yard. She looked better. Not completely. The dark circles beneath her eyes were still there, but they no longer looked quite so permanent. One Saturday afternoon she knocked on my door carrying 2 cups of coffee. I owe you a proper thank you, she said. You already baked bread. She laughed. This coffee is safer. We sat on the back steps watching Jasper lazily roll across the grass. For the first time in months, Claire seemed relaxed enough to enjoy the silence. I had my appointment, she said eventually. How did it go? The doctor thinks stress is making everything worse. I could have guessed that. She smiled faintly. So could I. Her therapist had recommended keeping a journal, limiting late-night work, and following a strict bedtime routine. It sounds simple, she admitted. But somehow it's the hardest thing I've ever tried. I understood. Sometimes slowing down felt far more difficult than working yourself into exhaustion. From that day forward, we quietly started looking after each other in ways too small for anyone else to notice. If I worked a double shift, she'd leave soup in my refrigerator using the spare key I'd once given her to water my plants during a business trip. If she had an early meeting, I'd walk Jasper before sunrise so she could sleep another half hour. No one talked about why. We simply did it. One rainy Thursday night, the chime finally rang. Its soft tone pulled me awake instantly. I crossed the yard wearing nothing but jeans and a jacket. Claire's back door stood open just a few inches. She hadn't gone outside this time. Instead, I found her standing in the kitchen. One hand rested lightly on the counter. The other held an empty glass she seemed completely unaware of. Claire? No response. She stared toward the dark window, as though someone stood on the other side. It's okay, I said gently. You're home. Her shoulders eased. She whispered something too softly to understand. What was that? I forgot. What did you forget? She frowned in her sleep. I promised. The sentence dissolved before it finished. Carefully, I led her back upstairs. This time, when she reached the bedroom door, she stopped. Without opening her eyes any wider, she asked, "Is Dad angry?" The question caught me completely off guard. I don't know. I answered honestly. He wouldn't want you blaming yourself. She slowly relaxed. I hope not. Those 3 words stayed with me long after she'd fallen asleep. The next morning, she remembered nothing. Not the kitchen. Not the conversation. Not asking about her father. She only looked embarrassed when I mentioned the chime. "I'm sorry." "You're apologizing again?" "I know. You don't have to." She looked away. "I'm trying to stop." Over the following month, the episodes became less frequent, but somehow more emotional. Sometimes she'd quietly cry while still asleep. Sometimes she'd stand beside a window as though waiting for someone. Once I found her kneeling beside Jasper's bed, gently stroking his fur while whispering, "Thank you for staying." The old dog never barked. He simply rested his head against her shoulder until I guided her back upstairs. Watching them together told me something important. Even asleep, kindness remained the strongest part of who she was. One evening she invited me over for dinner. The lasagna was slightly overcooked. She admitted she'd forgotten it was in the oven because she'd been answering work emails. "You really don't know how to stop working, do you?" she sighed. "I'm learning." Halfway through dinner her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then turned it face down without reading the message. "I'll answer tomorrow." "You sure?" She nodded. "For once, yes." I smiled. "That's progress." She raised her glass. To tiny victories, we clinked glasses. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, for the first time since I'd known her, the house didn't feel weighed down by invisible burdens. It felt lived in, comfortable, hopeful. Later that night, as I walked home beneath the porch light, I realized something that unsettled me more than I expected. I wasn't crossing the yard because I felt responsible anymore. I crossed it because I wanted to know she was okay. That difference frightened me. Not because caring was dangerous. Because somewhere along the way, without either of us noticing, concern had quietly become affection. And I had no idea whether Claire was beginning to feel the same. Spring arrived almost unnoticed. The snow melted from the gardens. The maple trees filled with fresh leaves, and the neighborhood slowly came back to life. Children rode bicycles again. Lawnmowers hummed on Saturday mornings. Jasper spent more time stretched across the warm grass than inside the house. Claire was changing too. Not all at once. Healing never seemed to work that way. Some mornings she looked rested. Other mornings the shadows beneath her eyes returned without warning. But she had stopped pretending every day was perfect. If therapy left her emotionally drained, she admitted it. If work became overwhelming, she said so instead of forcing another smile. For the first time since I'd known her, she allowed someone else to witness the difficult days instead of hiding them. One Friday evening, she invited me to join her for a walk along the river trail that bordered the town. The air carried the scent of fresh rain, and the water reflected the fading orange light of sunset. We walked in comfortable silence until she finally spoke. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "You don't have to if you're not ready." "I think I finally am." We stopped beside an old wooden railing overlooking the river. She folded her arms tightly across herself, staring at the water below. "My father died 3 years ago." I stayed quiet. "He had a heart attack while I was away on a business trip." Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the effort behind every word. "I missed his last phone call." She swallowed. When I finally listened to the voicemail, all he said was that he hoped my meeting went well and that he loved me. A tear slipped down her cheek. I've replayed that message hundreds of times. The pieces finally began fitting together. The apologies, the dreams, the guilt, the endless pressure to never disappoint anyone again. I kept thinking, she whispered, if I'd answered, maybe things would have been different. I shook my head gently. "You know that's not true. My therapist says the same thing." "Do you believe her?" Claire looked down. "Not every day." We remained there until the sun disappeared behind the trees. When we finally started walking again, she surprised me. "You know what scares me the most?" "What?" "That everyone has only seen the version of me that's falling apart." I smiled softly. "That's not the version I've seen." She looked at me. "I've seen someone who keeps getting back up, even when she's exhausted." Her eyes filled again. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to." She laughed quietly through the tears. You always say the simplest things. Maybe because the complicated ones haven't helped much. She nudged my shoulder with hers. I suppose that's true. A week later, her therapist suggested she spend less time alone in the evenings. Claire wasn't thrilled by the idea. I don't want people worrying about me. They already do, I answered. Especially one person. She looked at me knowingly. You? I wasn't trying to hide it. She smiled. No, you really weren't. That evening she brought dinner to my house instead of eating alone. Afterward, we played an old board game neither of us had touched since childhood. She cheated shamelessly. I accused her of moving pieces when I wasn't looking. She denied everything with an expression so innocent it only made me laugh harder. It was the loudest either of us had laughed in months. Later, while washing dishes together, she looked at me with unexpected seriousness. Thank you. For what? For treating me like I'm still me. I frowned. You are still you. It doesn't always feel that way. I dried another plate before answering. I think grief convinces people they're becoming strangers. She leaned against the counter. Does it ever stop? I don't know. I thought for a moment. But maybe it gets quieter. She nodded slowly. I'd settle for quieter. The following Tuesday, the door chime rang again. It had been almost 3 weeks since the last episode. I hurried across the yard expecting to find her wandering outside. Instead, I discovered the back door still closed. The chime had activated because the handle had moved. Claire stood just inside, one hand resting against the lock. She looked frightened even though she wasn't fully awake. I can't find the house, she whispered. My chest tightened. Claire, she slowly turned toward my voice. You're already home, she blinked once. Twice. Some awareness flickered across her face. Not complete wakefulness. Just enough recognition to hesitate. I am. Yes. She looked around the kitchen as though seeing it for the first time. Then her breathing steadied. I thought. Her voice faded. You don't have to keep searching. Very gently. I placed my hand over hers and eased it away from the lock. She didn't resist. Instead, she leaned forward until her forehead rested lightly against my shoulder. She was still asleep. Yet somehow, even in that strange space between dreams and waking, she seemed to know she wasn't alone. A minute later, she opened her eyes completely. Confusion flashed across her face. Then embarrassment.
Oh no.
You didn't leave the house. I didn't. I smiled. No. She looked toward the locked door and let out a long, shaky breath. I actually stopped. You did. For the first time since the sleepwalking had begun, she had interrupted the episode herself. It wasn't a cure, but it was hope. As I walked back across the yard beneath a sky full of stars, I realized something had changed. Claire wasn't just surviving anymore. Little by little, she was finding her way home. Summer arrived with longer evenings and open windows. By then, the door chime had become almost unnecessary. Weeks passed without a single episode. Claire still attended therapy every Thursday after work. She still kept a journal on her bedside table and had learned to leave her laptop downstairs instead of carrying it into the bedroom. The changes were small, but they added up. One evening she knocked on my door holding 2 paper bags. I brought dinner. You cooked. She grinned. I ordered. Probably safer. She laughed. Definitely safer. We spread everything across my kitchen table and spent 2 hours talking about nothing important. Movies we'd never finished. Vacations we hoped to take someday, and Jasper's strange habit of stealing socks from the laundry basket. For the first time since I'd met her, there wasn't an invisible weight hanging over every conversation. It felt easy. A month later, my company sent me out of town for a 3-day repair job. The night before I left, Claire stood by the fence, absent-mindedly tossing Jasper's tennis ball. You'll be back Friday, if everything goes according to plan. She nodded. I'll miss our evening talks. The words caught me off guard. I'll miss them too. She smiled, though there was something uncertain behind it. Promise you'll text when you get there. I promise. And when you're heading home? I promise that too. For 3 days we exchanged short messages. Nothing dramatic. Just little reminders that someone was thinking about the other. Drive safe. Hope work isn't too awful. Jasper keeps checking your yard. Coffee tastes worse without complaining about it together. When I finally turned onto Ashford Lane Friday evening, I found Claire sitting on my front steps with Jasper asleep beside her. She stood the moment my truck pulled into the driveway. I wasn't worried, she said quickly. I was only waiting. I know. She looked relieved enough that she didn't bother pretending otherwise. A few weeks later, Dr. Patel, her therapist, told her she had made remarkable progress. The nightmares hadn't disappeared completely. Grief rarely vanished so neatly, but she'd learned to face it instead of outrunning it. She no longer carried every burden alone. That evening we celebrated with ice cream from the little shop downtown. Halfway through the walk home, Claire stopped beneath the same maple tree where I'd first found her sleepwalking months earlier. She looked up into its branches. I barely remember that night. I remember enough for both of us. She turned toward me. I used to think you rescued me. I shook my head.
No.
You did? I just happened to be nearby. She smiled softly. You stayed? Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she asked the question that had probably been waiting between us for months. Can I ask you something? Always. When did you stop thinking of me as just your neighbor? I laughed quietly. I honestly don't know. Try. I looked toward the old fence separating our yards. I think it started with terrible lemon muffins. She laughed. Those were awful. They really were. Then when? I think every small thing mattered more than I realized. The packages rescued from the rain. The afternoons fixing things around each other's houses. The coffee. The conversations over the fence. And I met her eyes. The night I realized the first thing I wanted every morning was to see your porch light turn off, because it meant you'd made it through another night. Her eyes shimmered. I wasn't falling in love because I felt responsible. I took a slow breath. I was already in love before I understood that's what it was. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer. So, I guess it's my turn. She smiled through damp eyes. I didn't fall for you because you helped me. She reached for my hand. I fell for the man who never tried to fix my grief. The man who sat beside it. I squeezed her fingers gently. You don't have to carry it by yourself anymore. I know. For the first time, she said those words with complete confidence. The seasons continued changing. Jasper grew older, slower, and even more determined to nap in whichever yard received the most afternoon sun. The gate between our houses stayed open almost every day. Sometimes Claire worked from my dining room while I repaired tools in the garage. Other days I walked across to her kitchen just to steal a cup of coffee before work. Life never became perfect. There were still difficult anniversaries. There were still nights when old memories returned unexpectedly. But they no longer faced them alone. Nearly a year after that snowy night beneath the maple tree, Claire invited me to the neighborhood picnic. As the sun began setting, she slipped her hand into mine without thinking. No hesitation. No fear. Just certainty. Looking around at children laughing, neighbors talking, and Jasper sleeping beneath the shade of a bench, she smiled. You know something? What? I used to think home was a place. And now, she looked at me. I think it's the person who reminds you that you're safe when you've forgotten. I smiled. I've been trying to tell you that for a long time. She laughed softly. I know. As we walked back toward Ashford Lane, the evening breeze stirred the leaves above us. The old fence still stood between our houses, but now the gate remained open. Not because either of us needed rescuing anymore, because some paths are meant to stay open. They remind us that healing isn't about forgetting the darkness. It's about knowing there will always be someone waiting with the porch light on, ready to welcome us home.